Welcome to This Week's Okay at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, and my colleague, Russell Berger, both attorneys at Offit Kurman. And today we are talking about interviewing candidates. So obviously, interviewing is very different depending on the industry, depending on what your needs are. There's an art to it. And obviously, there's some things you need to be mindful of when you're interviewing, but it can be a really intensive process to try to figure out who you're going to hire and how you're going to interview, who's going to interview, all of those things. And depending on if you're in growth mode or where you're at, you might be doing a lot of that. So, what are some things that employers need to be considering when they are interviewing candidates that are just kind of pillars of interviewing, Russell, regardless of industry?
Yeah, well, because we're lawyers, I'll put this one first, and then we don't have to talk about it the rest of the way. But don't ask questions that are against the law or likely to lead to a claim of discrimination. So all the questions about, protected classifications, and we see it sometimes, the family planning questions. Don't ask those questions because the information you're going to gather is only going to lead to someone saying, well, I get this job because you asked this question and you got this information. You didn't like the answer and you discriminated against me. So hard no, stay away from those. But more generally, I think it's really important, particularly in the interview process itself, or leading up to the interview itself, to understand what you're actually looking for in terms of the personality and the fit. Obviously, skill, and a lot of job postings will say like proficient in X, Y, and Z. And the person either is or isn't, and that's a pretty black and white type question and analysis. That's fine, and that's part of it. That's important, but you should also do the homework to assess like what kind of person or personality types are we looking for in this role. And that's not necessarily to be entirely exclusive, but there's just certain skills that might be important for any specific role. In some roles, like a high degree of resilience. If you're in a sales role, maybe it's extroversion and confidence. If you're in an internal role and a quality control type role, maybe it's like that fastidiousness and quality orientation. There's certain like personality traits that you might decide are more important for certain jobs than others. And it's more of a fit question than it is a competency question. And you want to try to discern those during the interview process. And one of the things that you can't do or is going to be ineffective is to just come right out and say, hey, this is a sales job. Do you like being around people? Are you extroverted? Because the person's got any sense at all about what the job is, they're going to give you the answers that you want to hear. And they're just going to mirror back the leading question. So you don't want to do that. Instead, you want to ask experiential questions. You want to think about what situations might this person have been in that are similar to this job and ask them how they've handled it. Tell me about a time when is a good way to open up the storytelling from a candidate being interviewed. And I think you really want to get the person talking, and then you want to listen and ask it follow-up questions.
Yeah, I think what you're really hitting on, Russell, is that both from a liability perspective and from a getting what you need from a practical perspective is really being helpful and planning ahead. Because it's easy to say, all right, we just need to move forward. I need to talk to these people. I'm good at talking to people. I can just get in here and ask people questions and get what I need. But really, the more thoughtful you are and the more that you plan ahead of time on what you're looking for, the better off you are just to avoid accidentally doing something that might cause you a challenge down the road, either from a practical or a legal perspective, but also just so that you can be on the same page. 'Cause sometimes it's not just one person interviewing, it's multiple people. It might be a team, and you are going to be like looking to check several different boxes to make sure that person is a good fit, as you alluded to. So the more planning you can do ahead of time to really have an understanding, obviously have a good job description. And sometimes that changes too through the process, right? So sometimes having those conversations, I think that's another thing, is you want to have that right approach of having some planning, but not being too rigid in the sense that you might get in there and start talking to people about the role, start interviewing candidates and realize, oh, I thought we needed this. But actually, now that I'm talking to people and thinking this through and we're interviewing, I think we actually need something different and we need to evolve or change that. Or maybe the needs of the business evolve during that process, or you find a candidate that maybe checks some boxes you weren't expecting, and maybe that changes the scope of the role. So having enough flexibility to be open-minded while also staying tuned in enough to make sure that in these very small windows of time, an hour interview here or a follow-up interview there, that you're getting enough of what you need from the process.
Yeah, that's right. You got to work through the process to learn about the person. And interviewing can sometimes be a balance of selling the person on the opportunity and the job that you're offering, but it's also got to be a vetting of Are they competent, and are they going to be a good fit? Are they going to make sense in the role that we're offering here?
Well, thanks, Russell. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Sarah.